Welcome to session 2, where we are looking at the history of the Christmas celebration. There are a couple things to look at today. Obviously, the essential questions are topic outcomes for why we're looking at specific ideas this week. We want to have access to reading and viewing assignments. There's also a chart of different locations that I have found the different movies we have this term, but check out the student lounge for more suggestions as well there, and hopefully we can all find ways to view them. And then we'll look at the assignments. So 1, we have a discussion. 2, we have a submitted assignment. And I always like to throw in these full term reviews just so that you're thinking about it and preparing for it. I've already gotten some great messages as we are connecting on what we want to do for these full term projects. Also, when we get to that submitted assignment, I want to take some time to talk about literary analysis. I don't have huge expectations of that in the sense that I'm not expecting you to be literature majors who are writing about literature all the time, but I want to give you some tips and tricks so that you'll feel more comfortable tackling it. So what are we doing this week? What are we looking at? Look at all of these questions. Sometimes I like to look at them because I know that by the end of a session and by the end of a term, I'm going to know so much more, which is exciting. Okay, so we're going to look at the historical development of Western Christmas celebrations. I think it's important to point that out. Christmas is different everywhere. And think about even hemispheres. For the Western top hemisphere, we're looking at Christmas traditions in a way that we're generally talking about, cold weather, brr. But what about people on the opposite side of the world, the other hemisphere? And what about people down by the equator? They're not looking at that. So even the temperatures have an impact here, and yet not everyone is having those. So if you think about trees and stuff, what is the impact of cultural influences on that celebration of Christmas? What is the influence a Christmas carol has on the contemporary celebration of Christmas? I think this is a really big one, actually, because, we kind of have certain expectations, as it were, of sort of what people see or experience. We often talk about a Scrooge. We didn't have words like that before Dickens was writing about it. What are the techniques and effectiveness of various media upon the delivery of a story? That's going to be our submitted assignment as we start to gauge, which way is doing it sort of better or getting a stronger message across. Is it when we watch it or when we read it? How did Dickens's A Christmas Carol contribute to the way we contribute Christmas in the Protestant tradition? So how do we view it, considering his impact on it? In what ways does Dickens's A Christmas Carol reflect the cultural values of its day? That's super important to think about. There are a couple of ideas already stewing for me when I think about that, because he is talking about his particular time period. What does it mean to keep Christmas well? What would that idea have? How did Christmas customs snowball into what they are today? I think it's important every session to have a moment, at least a small minor moment, to recognize commercialization. Obviously, there's so much more to what all of us are doing, and there's so much more to every part, but that's part of it. Let's be honest. Okay, so what are we reading and watching? We are reading chapter 3 in Forbes's Christmas: A Candid History. We are looking at A Christmas Carol. I know it's the entire text. I'm going to look out there for some audiobooks because I'm sure it's out there. So I will try to include those in our weekly overview dashboard. On the dashboard, I do an announcement, and also I will link it in the student lounge. So look for those. And we are watching our first film, first of 4 films, A Christmas Carol, the 1999 version. Honestly, I love the Muppet Christmas Carol the most, but this is a great one as well. Patrick Stewart, I believe it's in that one. Okay, so here's our calendar of what we're doing. Notice this big section at the bottom. Our Christmas break is coming. Our Thanksgiving break is coming. So as we go through this, there's a lot to tackle with reading and watching films and all these things. So remember, we have some time to sort of play catch up when we get to Thanksgiving, or to work ahead. It's a great step there. Or actually take some time off. Wow, that would be a new one, wouldn't it? Okay, so what are we doing with this connection, with this discussion? We're looking at connecting things. Nothing lives in a vacuum, and a lot of times we are making these connections, but we're just not really talking about them. We're not really saying aloud, like, oh, that reminded me of, and then we start making all these connections in our heads. Well, we're sharing those here. We're trying to draw those connections more clearly. So our first question is about A Christmas Carol and Luke 19, 1 through 10. So again, if you want to look at like sort of PDFs that I've brought in, check out the Student Lounge. Otherwise, of course, these are available out there in the wide world for free. Then, what are some of the overall themes of Christmas that you see reflected in these two readings that you still see today? And how does that influence what you do at Christmas time? So, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, do we see some ideas that are similar when we read Luke 19, 1 through 10, and when we're looking at A Christmas Carol, the reading by Dickens? And then we're looking at them and saying, okay, so we saw that there were some commonalities. What then could be a theme? What is something that we're taking away? And this is something I'm going to discuss in a minute. Like, how do we find these themes? What are we looking for? When we start to see those themes, when we start to see those ideas, we'll be able to look around us and say, oh, I can kind of see what that looks like in the world around me. Because these things don't appear out of nowhere, right? They are part of sort of larger connections with humanity. And so people have been doing things like having a tree for absolutely ages. But did it always look the exact same? Why was there, what's the idea behind having that? Why do we still want to have that? What does it look like now? All of those different pieces. So next, we have our first submitted assignment. I have quite a few, 3 or 4 slides to add to this. Just if you feel comfortable writing about literature, then ignore me, go have fun. But if you feel like, oh, what does she want? What are those expectations there? Then I hope that you'll enjoy the next few slides. So here's our submitted assignment. It's essentially a compare and contrast paper. And we're writing 2 to 4 pages comparing and contrasting the 1999 film A Christmas Carol with the story that we're reading of the original by Charles Dickens. So our 3 questions to think about. Don't think of these as, okay, question, answer, question, answer. How do you want to explore these? What would your thesis be? Our questions are, how does the approach to the story differ between the different media? So film versus storytelling in a paper format. Are there some similarities? So we're looking for differences and similarities, which is why I'm talking compare and contrast. And how do the techniques involved contribute to the overall effect of the story? Like, are there things that you sort of get more easily or that are clearer or more beautiful depending on what we're looking at? Note that it says here, do not provide a plot synopsis. So something that we do differently when we're talking about literature is that we often have the expectation that everyone has experienced it. So when we're talking about A Christmas Carol, the 1999 version, our expectation going into that is that everyone has seen it. That's not normal, right, for most of what you are writing or working on. We often go into it thinking, okay, no one knows really about X, and so I'm going to give sort of a paragraph or so to sort of like what on earth X is. Well, when we're talking about literature, that would take so much time. So in general, we don't. Honestly, the first time that I ever really have given a synopsis in my writing about literature was when I got to my dissertation, because then I'm looking at obscure works, I'm looking at a big variety, and I want my readers who aren't familiar with absolutely everything to know what I'm talking about. But that is generally the very first, genuinely, it's the first time that I've ever done that. It is just understood that, hey, go. If they haven't read it or watched it, our expectation is that they will go read it or watch it. And then we're going to give proof within our work. We're going to say, I think these stories are the same in X way. See what happens in the film. See what happens on the page. I think they're different in this way. And then we're going to give those examples to help people. But our expectation is that they know what it is about. And that's very different. That's not normal for most types of writings. I'm saying a compare-contrast essay. So, what am I doing there? What does that mean? Well, there are lots of types of essays. Here are 4 just to kind of get us going. There are probably like 12 if we're looking at sort of essay formats. And then, of course, we could sort of break those apart into more. We could probably squish them together. But I just want to give you an idea that there are different forms, different ways that we're looking at things. Sometimes we want to really push for the meaning of something. What is that? Why? How does that work? How are we all going to get on the same page? Sometimes we're critical. We're analyzing the strengths and weaknesses. This isn't a negative critical. This is a really positive one where we're like, hey, what's going on there? Let's learn and grow. Well, here we are with our comparison contrast. We want to see how the two items connect. We want to show how the two items are. We want to discuss the likenesses between them. We want to convince our audience about those differences. So here's what I want you to think about. What do we see? Pick just a few points to show how they're alike or different. So for instance, we could have a paragraph about how they are alike with 1 or 2 points, a paragraph about how they're different with 1 or 2 points, and then we would bring all that together to show why that mattered. So remember as well, provide proof. The two versions of Scrooge are alike because, and then what do you see that specifically shows that? Obviously, it could be, the two versions of Scrooge are different, or we have different characters. So as I mentioned, I love the Muppet Christmas Carol, and obviously that one's more a flight of fancy because we have Rizzo, we have these two stuffed Muppet things telling us the story. They are functioning as the narrator. We have Kermit the Frog as a character, playing this character in the story and interacting with humans. Obviously, those are some big differences from the original story. So when we're looking at stories, we're saying, what do I see? What makes me feel feelings of any kind? A story is working if we're reacting. So what makes me happy about it? What makes me sad about it? What makes me upset that they are acting in that way, or what words do I like or not like? We want to talk about all those differences. We don't want to say, oh, I think that's a good one. What is good? What does that mean? What does that feel like? So share those details to get other people connected. So let's talk about some starter points. It's kind of impossible to say that there's only one correct answer when we go into comparing and contrasting. There are so many possibilities for what you get to pick, and you get to pick it. You don't have to say, well, other people probably like X better, so I'm going to go with that. Okay, fine, but what do you like? What do you see? What did you experience? Anything that you share is worth it. It's exciting. And it's difficult to be wrong. A wrong answer is when we just don't read the story, or when we're really puzzled and we just refuse to look anything up. So if you find yourself puzzled, reach out and ask some questions. I'm also going to share some links. If you want to use those to support your work, make sure you cite them. But there are lots of works out there that will help us navigate it. I often encourage students to first write down some thoughts of your own. What do you feel? What are you experiencing? Then, if you feel like you need that next step, head on over to the internet and do a search and see what other people say. But the reason we're writing something down first is that we often feel like, oh, well, that person's like, on, sparknotes.com. They must know what they're talking about, and I'm probably wrong. Never feel that way. They are choosing a particular theme, probably a really strong theme, to share with the world. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It doesn't mean that your theme isn't there. It just means that it's a different one. Already, if you do a search, you go to litchart.com and you look at A Christmas Carol by Dickens, you'll find, like 5 or so themes. And they're all valuable. Do we need to write about 5 themes? No, we don't. But we want to be in that sort of headspace. So I want to talk about good, better, and best. When we just have a good answer, it's when we're like, I saw something on the page and it exists. So I'm using as an example here The Stronger by August Strindberg, which is free online as well if you want to read it. It's interesting. It's a play about 2 women. Okay, done. We have what's on the page. That is a great first step. Like, that means we've read it. That means we've looked at it. That means we've watched it. The next step to make it better tells us what the work says and how it does that. So it may tell us something about the form that the work takes, or about how the author is sort of embracing the world of film or the world of writing. So here's another one. The Stronger is a play about 2 women. Yes, we already had that. And the author uses dramatic writing to portray a conversation or dialogue between 2 characters. So we've started to add some understanding, like what's happening to these 2 women on the page, or in this case it's a play, so on the stage. A best answer is going to tell us what it says, how it says it, and it's going to start poking holes into what it means. It's a play about 2 women. The author uses dramatic writing to portray a conversation or dialogue between these 2 characters. Through this dialogue, the author is able to show that strength can mean different things depending on one's perspective. So we've started to find a theme and a meaning. So now let's go look at these ideas for us. What does it say? Think physical, like who's actually on the page, who's on the screen, but also think emotional or mental. A Christmas Carol is about a man who is mean and miserly. Yeah, we have him on that film. We have him on the page, and he's mean. But it's also about what happens to our soul when we're greedy. Like, emotionally, that's what's happened to this character. How does it do it? Well, in our case, it was originally a short story by Dickens, but now we can also watch it in multiple film versions. But what does it mean? Why do we come back to this story? Why do we have multiple film versions? Why are people always remaking it? Why are pretty much all of them good? Why is it so interesting? Well, it has so many themes. Things like the persistence of time, greed and selfishness, family, charity. With Scrooge's epiphany, the story becomes a redemption arc that helps us ask ourselves difficult questions. And we could start looking at that as we noticed in our discussion about reading Luke. What happens to Scrooge? What does he become after all of this? Well, what happens to the people in the Bible who are touched by Jesus? What happens to them? Is that not a similar thing, that we grow as people? Epiphanies are really beautiful and important. So when we're asking those questions, we're going to find ways to explore those themes. So back to here, we don't answer these as just, okay, how does the approach to the story differ between the different media? X, Y. Are there similarities? Yes, X, Y. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to say, what did these propel me to think about? What ideas or concepts am I thinking about here? I'm going to write an introduction with a thesis. I'm going to discuss my 3 points, and I'm going to have a conclusion that restates my thesis and goes forward. Remember, there isn't a wrong answer to how you're exploring the story. You're sharing what you see and experience. Look for those details that catch you. Talk to the people you're watching it with. See if there's something that as a group really strikes you as interesting or necessary or surprising. So now how do you get these? A Christmas Carol is here. We have it on, so far what I have found is that it's $2.99 on all these different sources. I did a search. There's a website, I can't remember it offhand right now. I'll try to add it, that like helps you find where it films are. And there were even more things, but I wasn't really sure of all the providers. There were so many, so I just grabbed ones that are sort of like more popular. As you can see, Hulu has very little, Disney Plus doesn't have a lot, but Google Play is easy to get to, YouTube is, those kind of things. You don't have to be subscribed to get them. So if you find those other options, please share. Please look for your local library and see if they have any copies to borrow. But it looks like A Christmas Carol is $2.99 at all of those, and don't hesitate to share what you find. Finally, our term projects, a quick reminder, we are wanting to create this representation. So already we're looking at themes, we're looking at ideas. How would we show an epiphany? How would we show that new knowledge that we get? What if we wanted to create something that shows what gifts mean? Are gifts really just about sort of, here's an object? Or are they about what we're doing to think about someone? In fact, I had complained to my brother when I was much younger that he wasn't thinking about presents, that he was expecting other people to do that, to find, a great present, or he'd mine all of us for what would be good for so-and-so, so that we were doing that emotional lifting of, what someone would need. Obviously, this was years ago. He's a grown person now, but we were in our teens. And so I had picked on him for that. I was like, don't just give people money or these things. Like, gifts are about knowing people and about loving them. So I get my Christmas present from him, and it is an envelope. And I open it, and it has $1 in it. And I'm like, did you not pick up anything? And then he's like laughing, of course. And he said, well, read the rest of the card. And then under the dollar bill was the start of a scavenger hunt sort of thing, a treasure hunt. And that's when I found all 3 of the Star Wars VHS tapes. This was back in the day. And I was so thrilled. And I think it helped both of us, to think about what we really mean by gifts and what those look like. So start to look at ideas, look around you, look at things that you have as part of your life, things that you love, like sitting at the dinner table. What does that look like? How could you make that beautiful? How could you connect everyone? Play around with those ideas. There are any number of them. I've actually been thinking about wreaths in general because I think those are so pretty as a welcome. I've always loved that, my friends who do wreaths. I've always thought, oh, that's so beautiful when I walk up to their house and I see something on the door. And our service project. I'm already getting great emails, as I said, about this. But look around you. What do you want to be connected to this year? How are you already doing this? I think that's a really big one. A lot of times we feel like, oh, we just do things. We help out. That service, that is loving others. And more often than not, it's already part of your life. And I love when you get that epiphany of realizing how ingrained service is in your life. So start looking around you and see what you can find, and don't hesitate to send me a message and we can brainstorm, we can meet on Zoom, all kinds of things to sort of chat through those ideas. And here are, of course, some different examples that students have given me over time. So make sure you're in the student lounge where I will upload a template for writing the submitted assignment. But again, there's no real wrong way to do it. You're exploring, you're asking questions. I'm giving you tips about what a literary analysis looks like so that you can be more comfortable, but I don't want you to feel pressured. You are not a literature major. You are stepping into the world of analysis and you're like, what's going on here? Start your first step there. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be wonderful to see sort of what you see. So have fun and see what you want to share. And you are, of course, always welcome to ask me more questions and get more feedback or pre-feedback on any of those works. If you're nervous or uncomfortable about what you've done and you don't know if it's right, remember you can always send me an email and I can review it first.